January 1st, 2023. A gang stormed a prison in Chihuahua, Mexico, releasing over 20 inmates, one of which was El Chapo's right-hand man, El Neto. El Neto was no ordinary criminal. He carried out tasks that no other man could. He was seen as a soulless devil. But to understand just how evil he was, you need to know his role in El Chapo's drug empire. How he ended up in prison, how he escaped, and most importantly, what happened after his insane prison escape. The beginning. El Neto, whose real name is Ernesto Alfredo Peñón de la Cruz, was born on April 6, 1989 in Chihuahua, Mexico. His childhood told the story of the life he would eventually live, as he started off as a petty thief on the street. And by 2007, at the age of 18, El Neto was already under the radar of Mexican authorities. He was pinpointed as the leader of a kidnapping ring, Los Metzicles, a ring of criminals that executed their victims and shipped their heads in coolers to their families for failing to pay their ransoms. Just thinking of that really makes me want to puke. But that wasn't the worst of crimes El Neto and his criminal syndicate committed. They carried out a wave of robberies, gruesome murders, and vandalisms for the Sinaloa cartel and privately for El Chapo. Los Metzicles consisted of ruthless and soulless murderers, just like El Neto. They were mostly Mexicans deported from the US for illegal immigration and heroin addiction. They had similar tattoos and a strong will to kill. El Chapo adopted this group as a wing of his cartel, more like a wing of death. He had lots, and I mean lots of men working under him, but he trusted El Neto and Los Metzicles to carry out a clean job without leaving any traces behind on rival cartels. El Neto was specifically appointed by El Chapo to lead this group after its former leader, Jesus Eduardo Soto Rodriguez, aka El Lalo, was arrested and taken to a federal prison where he ran things from the inside. El Neto was gaining credibility in the streets, charging over 800,000 to $1.5 million pesos per kidnapped victim. He was living the life, money, parties, and access to lots of hot women, until the newly elected Mexican president at the time, Felipe Calderón, began a war against the cartels that led to the downfall of El Neto and his gang. The beginning of the end. December 11th, 2006. Former Mexican President Felipe Calderón began an operation called War on Drugs, aka Guerra contra el Narcotráfico en Mexico. He dispatched 6,500 Mexican army soldiers to different parts of the country, clamping down on as many drug cartel members as he could. But the main point of President Calderón's attack was in the Ciudad Juárez, where El Neto and his gang operated. Now you're probably thinking, okay, El Neto's about to go down. Which is true, but before he went down, El Neto did something that no one could even dream of, and that was betraying El Chapo. After El Chapo's escape from prison in 2001, he wanted to control the Ciudad Juárez crossing points, which were in the hands of the Carrillo Fuentes family of the Juárez cartel. And despite a high degree of mistrust between the two organizations, the Sinaloa and Juárez cartels had a working agreement at the time. But what El Chapo didn't know is that the Juárez cartel was working behind him to get El Neto and his men on their side. But as always, El Chapo was one step ahead of him. He had convened a meeting with Ismael Zambada Garcia, aka El Mayo, Juan Jose Esparagoza Moreno El Azul, and Arturo Beltran Leiva. In this meeting, they discussed killing Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, who was in charge of the Juárez cartel. And they did in fact kill this man, along with his wife and 2 children. But this is where El Neto comes back into the picture. El Neto was already considering working for the Juárez cartel, but once Rodolfo was killed, it kinda gave him a reason not to. However, when the drug war officially began, El Chapo was the first to break the non-aggression pact the major cartels had agreed to, setting in motion the fighting between cartels for drug routes that has claimed more than 60,000 lives till today. This, for some reason, made El Neto angry, cause at the end of the day, El Chapo breaking such a pact meant putting him and his men under more pressure to defend not just themselves, but the Sinaloa cartel as a whole. He knew he couldn't trust El Chapo anymore, so he decided to take up the offer from the Juárez cartel and work for them instead. Now, you don't need me to tell you that betraying a man like El Chapo has its consequences, and for El Neto, those consequences were bloody. However, El Chapo once again was one step ahead, because even during the war on drugs, only a few Sinaloa cartel members were being taken into custody. Out of the thousands of men arrested between 2006 and 2009, only a few of them were members of the Sinaloa cartel. This brought up suspicions about whether or not President Calderon was intentionally allowing the Sinaloa cartel to go scot-free. Sinaloa's rival cartels saw their leaders killed and syndicates dismantled by the crackdown. But the Sinaloa gang was relatively unaffected and took over territories, including the coveted Ciudad Juarez. At this point, El Neto knew he probably made the biggest mistake of his life. And in 2009, still during the heat of the drug war, El Neto was arrested and jailed. But that's not the end of his story. The capture. After his arrest, El Neto was charged with 30 kidnappings and various counts of homicide. His trial lasted until 2010, when he was sentenced to over 224 years in prison. Members of Los Metzicles attacked the convoy that was taking him to court. This guy almost succeeded, but because El Neto sustained an injury during the operation, he was recaptured by Mexican authorities. He was sent to the Centro de Reinserción Social Número 3 Penitentiary, located in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. But believe me when I say that El Neto's prison cell was more like a 5-star luxury hotel than it was an actual cell. He tore a few pages out of Escobar's book and made that cell as comfortable as it could be. He had a TV, cell phone, lots of drinks, and other amenities. But this was all partly legal because the prison facility had a special section called VIP cells. There are about 10 of them, and they're reserved for high-ranked cartel members brought in. And it all kind of makes sense because a high-profile criminal like El Neto should have been taken to a max security prison. But he wasn't. So he definitely had inside men. And when the news of El Chapo's extradition to the US broke out, El Neto and his predecessor El Lalo planned a riot that led to the killing of over 17 people in 2017 as a form of retaliation against the Mexican government. And if you're thinking that's shocking, that's fair. After all, you probably didn't hear what he did next, so let me tell you. August 11th, 2022, a bloody day dubbed Black Thursday, was El Neto's first attempt to follow in El Chapo's footsteps and break out of prison. He ordered the execution of violent acts in the city to escape prison. The bloody day ended along with the lives of 11 people and left at least 20 wounded. And in addition to the attacks in the city streets, there was a confrontation inside the prison where El Neto was confined. Members of Los Metzicles attacked members of Los Chapo's cell, who worked with El Chapo. So whether you like it or not, El Neto was winning. He was in a luxury prison. He had his men inside and outside giving him protection, and he had the government in a chokehold. So what more could he have wanted? Well, the answer to that question is to be a free man. The escape. Just 5 months after his failed prison escape in 2022, El Neto perfectly planned his escape from prison. So perfect, in fact, it could have passed as a Hollywood movie scene. 7 a.m. sharp on January 1st, 2023. Young armed men arrived in different vehicles at the prison where El Neto was confined. They disguised themselves as relatives of inmates, allowing them to circumvent the security at the prison. Once they got in, they shot and killed 2 policemen in the main access booth and headed straight for El Neto's cell to break him out. Once they got him out of his cell, they went ahead to also release El Neto's right-hand man, El Chilin. Once the objective was complete, they entered a crossfire with a few guards inside the prison and managed to escape to the parking lot where their drivers were waiting. 27 other inmates took advantage of this breach and tried to escape. However, El Chilin was caught up in the crossfire and was shot dead. While El Neto and his gang vanished into the city, the other inmates that managed to escape roamed the streets, beating, stealing, and breaking anything to aid their escape. About 6 cars were stolen in the process, with 7 long weapons, 2 short weapons, 5 armored vests, and 737 useful cartridges of various calibers left behind by El Neto's gang members. The entire city was in chaos. The Mexican Defense Secretary Luis Crescencio Sandoval immediately sent out a unit of almost 1,000 troops from the Army, National Guard, and State Police to take control of the situation and ultimately to capture El Neto. When the military entered El Neto's cell to see if anything there could lead to his whereabouts, they found around $87,000 in cash, along with a large variety of drugs including 4 kilos of crystal meth, 40 grams of cocaine, 16.2 kilos of marijuana, 1.5 kilos of heroin, and 8 fentanyl pills, just placed in a corner. This led to the immediate arrest of the prison director Alejandro Alvarado Deyes for allowing an inmate to possess such a large amount of drugs under his supervision. But all that didn't matter because 17 people had died, including 10 prison guards. More than 12 people were injured and everyone kept wondering, where the hell was El Neto? The end. Following the mass escape, the government launched a large-scale manhunt that turned international when authorities informed U.S. law enforcement that they suspected the fleeing prisoners were trying to cross the border into the U.S. However, police found El Neto and several other prisoners in the Aztecas region in central Mexico in a house at about 12:30 a.m. Once he was spotted by the police, El Neto tried to run away in a vehicle, but ended up crashing that vehicle into a gas station while dodging cop cars. He opened fire against police officers, but eventually got shot and brutally injured in the process. The authorities decided to transport him to a police station rather than a hospital to prevent the hospital from becoming a target for his gang. And shortly after he arrived at that police station, El Neto, after a long life of sin and evil, finally died.